Okay, so the Pixies, I keep pushing for that
Oh
because
yeah, the
it's
Pixies.
yeah.
Okay, well the Pixies had already been passed on once by Elektra, which I didn't know
Really?
at the time. One of the great perks back in the day was the account at Tower Records.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so if you were an executive in good standing,
Buy whatever you want.
you can buy whatever you want. You bring it to the cash register. They waved some magic wand over it, and you walked out the door. So
See, that's what the Everly Brothers could do with all products.
so I remember being in Tower Records on Sunset Boulevard and seeing Surfer Rosa. And because I was acquisitive by nature when it came to records, certainly, and I had a voracious appetite, and that particular album stood out on the rack.
Yeah, there's a cover of a nude woman dancing on it.
It stood out on the rack.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Scantily clad woman.
It made it into the stack of records that went out the door, and that the thing when I got around to playing Surfer Rosa,
It blew your mind.
no, it didn't. It
didn't blow your mind.
It was completely
foreign to your mind.
foreign to my mind.
Okay.
Now, other things had been foreign to my mind. For example, right around the same time, I think in my memory, Sonic Youth was a group that was
Foreign to your mind.
around
You should have hired me back then.
and foreign to my mind, right? But there was something about the Pixies that was attractive enough to investigate.
Right.
So I guess I listened to it, on the plane back to New York, and I listened to it over that weekend, or whatever it was that prompted me to call their manager and say, tell me about your Pixies.
Ken Goes.
Ken Goes. And that resulted in them coming to visit.
They came to visit you?
Yeah, they came to visit
Up
me.
to Elektra?
Yes.
Okay.
And
The whole band?
yes. And I remember being terrified too.
Yeah.
Because something called Black Francis,
Black Francis is
was
Peter.
going to be in my office.
Oh, Black Francis is at you at the door. Yeah, right.
I thought that was
The reception,
frightening.
yeah.
I mean, because I've been listening
Listen
a
to the
lot,
lyrics, yeah,
a lot,
right.
and I'm thinking this guy, is some sort of borderline personality with schizophrenic, sociopathic tendencies, or
Right.
whatever I thought. But I was apprehensive about meeting with the Pixies. But of course, the reality of that was 4 of the most affable people on earth walk in the office and sit down, and they gave me, on that visit, they gave me it was either a demo tape or it was rough mixes of what was going to be Doolittle.
Doolittle, right.
And
Do you still have that?
yes,
I love a copy of that.
yes, and it'll be on eBay shortly.
No,
So, so those tapes, of course, were also extremely encouraging. So that was enough to get your basic sort of lazy A&R guy down to a gig to go see him.
Let's pause there for a second too, because I think that. So the other question I get all the time, other than I want to be an A&R person, is I want to get signed. What do I have to do to get signed?
Yeah, right.
And have a great show, right? And have a demonstrable evidence that people care about your music. Have people, even if it's 12 people, screaming passionately about what you do.
Well, unfortunately, in this day and age, 12 people isn't going to cut
12
it
people's not
anymore.
enough, but
Right.
Some demonstrable amount of people. But go
Yeah,
ahead.
certainly.
So they come to your show. You've listened to the record. You're kind of confused by the record, but there's something there. They're nice people, but still, the next step is when are you playing? And I don't
Right.
think that changes. And I hear a lot from artists. Well, what if I don't play live? What if I just write songs? And my response is, well, you have to play live. I mean, I just don't know.
In this day and age, you absolutely have to. I mean, certainly, there are plenty of instances over the course of the last 30, 40 years where, the people were sequestered in their recording home studios or whatever it is. Like I don't know, like Todd Rundgren making Something Anything or some such thing. He wasn't
another
out.
example.
I don't know.
I think you need to go out and play live, even if you're making electronic
I
music.
think if you're a musician, half your world is performing your music.
Right.
Otherwise you're underserving yourself.
Yeah, and Todd did play live.
Yeah. Okay. Not a great example. Okay. So I went down to this club. It was on First Street and First Avenue, I think, called The World, I think. And I remember the place was packed out, completely mobbed. And the Pixies came on. I also remember it as being really hot and sweaty, and everybody pressed together like crazy. And that made it all that much more intense. And then they started playing, and people started jumping up and down. And I kind of remember, I don't know, it was so steamy in there that, you know, the perspiration was rising and hitting the ceiling and coming back down.
As rain.
And rain. and so it was quite a gig, but still, and this is the part that I guess always struck you, you know, I was still really hard pressed to understand their music, which might sound funny, except, you know, they found a way to fashion a couple of guitars, a bass, and a drum in a way that was not normal.
Right.
Okay. And one rule of thumb about A&R, and this is absolutely very, very true. You know, if you picture all groups as part of a pie chart, let's say, if you've got a musical entity that's got its own slice of that pie chart, no matter how thin, I mean, it could be microns, but if it's their own slice, it's going to have an audience.
And you know, I'd like to underline that point somehow.
Exactly. You know, but it's not that easy to find things that are that unique and distinctive. That's the challenge.
Well, another band that you either signed or worked with that did that was Fish.
Right. And also, I think They Might Be Giants.
They Might Be Giants. Weezer, Ween. I mean, you can.
Yeah, it's easy to see when you sort of step back and take a macro
often these
approach.
bands are horribly ignored and misunderstood
in their time.
At the beginning, well, in their time, but certainly the beginning of their time, and finally, they persevere, and people begin to understand.
People begin to come around to their point of view, right? So, I remember leaving the club, and I had brought, you know that A&R, Joe. How many A&R guys does it take to screw in a light bulb? I don't know. What do you think?
What do you think? Right?
Yeah. Okay. So I specifically remember taking two other bona fide members of the A&R staff down to this gig, specifically because I knew I was going to be flummoxed and completely insecure about my feelings. And I remember leaving the club because it was so hot. We get outside on the street. I remember it was a relief to be walking down the sidewalk. Right. And I think I literally said to him, I don't know, what do you think, you know? And one of them said, pass. And the other one said, pass.
And you said, silence.
And I said, I don't know. You know, any act that can play for 80 minutes and I don't understand the first note, that's an act to be interested in. And that's kind of, in my mind, that was the moment I decided we should do it, you know. And we did, and it worked out pretty good.
It's an amazing trajectory, and I appreciate you taking the time to go through that history. And I think along the way we've talked about a lot of kind of things that are applicable to people out there today. But if you were addressing the person that wants to do A&R, you know, and I'll leave that wide open for what that means. Or if you're addressing the artist that wants to have a career, and I'll leave that wide open. What do you tell them?
Well, the person that wants to do A&R should absolutely turn their back entirely on the major label record industry.
Okay.
Forget that as a goal or a destination. A&R in this day and age means something completely different. It's probably, unfortunately, but it's true. I mean, major labels helped to undo themselves by minimizing the role of A&R in the first place. What happened, if I can digress for a minute and we can get back, what happened, of the many things that happened, was that they grew bigger and bigger distribution pipelines.
Right.
Because they were growing and growing, because they had so much money, and they thought, well, you know, what do you do in America? You get bigger and stronger and
buy more stuff.
Right. So they built, you know, mechanisms by which they could release many more records, but they decided that they'll take anything. I mean, eventually it became, well, we need records. We need records.
Stuff.
Pete, we can't wait for you to actually think this is really special. You know, screw that.
Get us a record.
Well, you know, Suddenly the president of the label would be bringing in tons of records. The lawyer buddies would have production deals. The records just came falling out of the sky and onto people's desktops. I mean, I remember in the 90s, I specifically remember that product managers, which was even a role that was created to cope with all the product, product managers, they went from having their little stack of this month's releases to having, the World Trade Tower of 2 stacks of this month's releases. And the thing about records, unfortunately for the business, is that they all have, or at least the good ones, all have their own point of view. They all are about something. And unless the product manager and the other marketing people and the publicity people, the promotion people, unless they can spend the time to get to understand the product that they're selling, they're going to do a rotten job of selling it, which they began to do with a relentlessness that was really breathtaking. So, the role. So my point being, the role of A&R became more and more diminished anyway. And at this point, forget it. I mean, I go into, first of all, if you've been at a major record label any time in the last 5 years now, they're quieter than lending libraries. Okay. I mean, when I was a kid and I was 15 and I would go to a record company, Columbia Records or Warner Brothers Records, the elevator doors would open and the place would be rocking. Okay.
Yeah. So you've turned your back on that.
Yeah,
Where do you turn, not you, but one, if you want to do it now, you turn your back to that, where do you turn to?
Well, you do it yourself. I mean, the DIY kind of ethic, which major labels, and rightfully so, used to sort of scoff at back in the 80s when I think it was more or less invented or popularized as an ethos. Now it really is what counts. Okay,
the DIY ethos.
The DIY, yes, because if you can build your audience and you can, it's no problem to make your own records and to sell your own records and to take the money from selling your own records and reinvest it in your business. Well, this is part and parcel of your other question, which is, if you're an artist, you're simply an entrepreneur in opening a new small business. That's what you are. And you're going to grow it as best you know how, and you're going to succeed if you're good enough and shrewd enough and savvy and flexible and all the things you need to be, or you're going to fail for lack of those skills and abilities. And that's really, I look hard at the landscape all day, every day when I'm paying attention, and that's the conclusion. Okay, it happens to be a point in time where you either do it yourself, and you'll end up far better off for it, or you'll die trying. But that's absolutely the way to go.
Pete, I want to thank you so much. It's a great
pleasure.
conversation.
Sure.
Tune in next time, Artist House Music.